Andrew Bolt. Andrew, your reaction to this emphatic win for the no vote?
Well, I don't know why there's been so many long faces tonight. I think this is a brilliant day for Australia, absolutely brilliant. We've defeated an attempt to divide us by race in our constitution. We've stood for the principle of one person, one vote. I think it's marvellous. It seems Australians have seen through the falsehoods of the Yes campaign. I just wonder now how Anthony Albanese can stay on as Prime Minister. I mean, he's put us through this nightmare. He's wasted nearly $400 million of taxpayers' money. He's had Australians at each other's throats. Some of the scenes at some of the polling booths over the last couple of days, like the monstering of Warren Mundine, have been disgraceful. And unfortunately, the poison from all this will survive beyond today. There's going to be a battle to interpret what this vote means. Already, well, the whole campaign, Albanese and others have been saying this is about how nice we are to Aborigines. This is about racism. How can you then say, well, you know, Australians are racist? This would be a terrible blow to young Australians, to young Aborigines, to our image. Albanese has caused all this for nothing, for nothing. A month ago, when it was absolutely clear, 2 months ago, it was absolutely clear this voice would go down. Albanese didn't pull out. He kept going. And he didn't temper his rhetoric about, you know, how this was about being nice and all that kind of stuff. And there's one more reason too that he should go. One more reason. He said without the voice, nothing would change for Aborigines. We'd be voting for the same failure. That means he doesn't have a voice and he doesn't have any ideas to improve things for Aborigines, which we all want. And if he hasn't got any ideas, if he's completely out of chocolates, no voice to tell him what to do, make way for someone who can make a difference. So I just think brilliant day for Australia, but the bitterness will remain, and the person to blame for that is Anthony Albanese.
He says that he is honouring the election commitment he made, Andrew, and that he was, in his words, showing good manners in doing what he was asked to do by the Indigenous leadership. What's your take on that as we look at the numbers
so much
come in
that to unpack.
It's been rejected so clearly?
Well, a stupid promise to make. The Indigenous leadership, seriously? There's someone on your panel who's Indigenous. He didn't want this voice. Warren Mundine didn't want it. Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price didn't want it. It was self-selected activists who said this is what we want. It was an ambit claim. I mean, we've had results coming from towns with big Aboriginal populations that are saying no as well. I mean, who? And this is, don't forget, our Constitution is for 100% of Australians, not 3%, for 100%. And we all have a say in this. We all have a right to have a say. And Australians have said emphatically no. And you say it was his promise, it was a stupid promise, a terrible promise to make in the first place. But at various stages along the process, Anthony Albanese could have pulled out. He could have pulled out, he could have said, I'm not going to put the country through it. The mood, you know, the support isn't there. He didn't do that. Right up to a month ago, he could have pulled out. So, well, not a month ago, maybe 2 months ago, he could have pulled out. He didn't. It's just terrible. And the way he sold it up to polling day itself, that this was a test of our niceness. No, it wasn't. There are plenty of people who want to be nice and generous, but they didn't want us divided by race, and they didn't see how this voice would help. Pretty simple proposition.
Andrew, what do you make of the fact that we're seeing these many Labor seats vote so overwhelmingly against the proposition? We're seeing Labor seats in Western Sydney. In fact, right across the board in Tasmania, there is a big cohort of Labor voters that have rejected this today.
Well, it's not surprising. I mean, think of it like this. Here is a voice that was proposed for one sector of the community, right, for Aborigines doing it tough. But it was pushed, in fact, by the Aboriginal elite, people who are doing quite well. I mean, you know, you've got people, Sean there is a businessman and pushing it. You know, they're doing quite well. Adam Goods, boy, a lot of Australians would love to be doing as well as him. They were pushing this, but there's a lot of Australians out there, and a lot of them be Labor voters who are doing it extremely tough, thinking, what about us? If you're an African immigrant, doing it tough. What about us? If you're a Chinese, what about us? There are a lot of people doing it tough. So they would be saying, wait a minute, why a voice for them but not for us? And they are Labor voters. And my question for the Labor Party is, I did not hear a single Labor Party MP, not a single one of them say this voice is wrong. This voice is divisive. This voice is racist. Don't divide Australians. Not one. They all went along with it when, meanwhile, many of their own supporters and members didn't want this. Unions as well.
We will talk to you a bit later in the program. Let's bring in our panel once again. And Chris Kenny, Andrew says that the Prime Minister should pull the pin, that this is a reflection on him. What's your read on the politics, the fallout of this referendum?
Well, I disagree with just about everything Andrew said then, so we could go through it point by point. But one thing I'd like to say at the outset, of course, is we all know that our Constitution has a race power. And the 1967 referendum allowed that power to be applied to Indigenous people as well. That's the important outcome of 67.
It put it in.
And that power has been used only to make laws and policies for Indigenous people. And under that power, we have native title laws, cultural heritage laws and the like. So the Constitution has special arrangements for Indigenous people, and the idea of a voice is to give them a non-binding say on those issues. So let's just be clear about that. I'm also clear, of course, about the voters rejecting it and accept the will of the people. But what I think's been rejected here is division. And I think the No campaign, they have every right to oppose this. Of course they did. But I think it's incumbent upon our political class when dealing not just with the Constitution, but when dealing with something as fragile and important as Indigenous recognition and reconciliation, to come at us with some sort of a bipartisan approach or as close to it as they could. And I do think the No campaign's choice to run on racial division, an argument I don't believe they actually subscribe to, because they say they would legislate a voice as well. And if you legislate a voice, it can't be united.
I opposed it on racial division from day one.
Yes, but
from day one.
You did, but Peter Dutton went with it for a year. Now this is the key point.
But so did Mr. Howard.
But this is the key
so did
point.
Tony Abbott.
This is the key point, Peter. A voice to Parliament cannot be non-divisive because it's only legislated, and racially divisive because it's in the Constitution. It's the same
I suspect
thing.
the legislated voice will die a natural death.
Well, this is your point then.
This is an
so it was just a ruse, an empty promise.
No, I don't know. I'm not in the party room and neither are you. I mean, this...
Well, it's what Peter Dutton's current policy.
Let's see what happens tomorrow. But both sides of politics will look at this result, given how emphatic it is, and they will both have to now chart a course in the Indigenous policy area.
That's where we are. We have a lot of Indigenous Australia being repudiated tonight in their aspirations. And my point about the key No argument is simply that it is not plausible. You can't say a reform is racially divisive, but say it's something that you would legislate for yourself.
You were trying to, again, put this position that every Aboriginal person thinks the same. It's like saying to Michelle and I, just because we're women, we've got to line up on the same view on childcare or the same view on parental leave.
This is a ridiculous proposition.
But that's been the line from the Yes camp from day one.
Anthony and I,
they're call flutes out there.
Way back, we disagree on this and other issues, including
their call flutes today were saying 80% of Aborigines want this, vote for it.
Well, they've had surveys like that. The point is, this whole thing of calling it racially divisive is toxic because it is self-fulfilling, and that's what we've seen. Nobody wants to vote for that.
We've got Andrew Bolt still with us. Andrew, your reaction to that?
I find it astonishing that Chris is still running this thing as, oh, it's the No campaign that's racially divisive, as he tries to sell us still, despite the result, a racially divisive proposal. Australians have looked at it and said, this will divide us by race, Chris, and they do not want it. And it's not the No campaign that's being divisive. And you can say, oh, look, there should be bipartisanship. Fine, Chris, why don't you agree with me and at least 55% of Australians on this proposal? Then we will have bipartisanship. Mate, you ran and you lost. You fought the fight and you lost. And mate, just point out one more thing before you go on, Chris.
Could I just get a word in?
One more thing. Just one more thing. You've had a lot of words on the panel. This is only my second go. Let me just say one more thing and I'll cede the floor to you. This is a fantastic day for fighting the race politics that has driven Western society mad for years now with the Black Lives Matter and all that kind of stuff. You've had actually 2 elections today. One was this one, saying no to racial division and The Voice. And the other was just in New Zealand. They're still counting the votes. It looks like the Labor government there will go down in a screaming heap with probably half the support they had, 3 years ago. And one of the big factors there, it's race politics. It's race politics. This is a red letter day for fighting against the race politics that has been splitting not just us and not just New Zealand, but the Western world. Hooray!
I just think it's very, very divisive to describe a measure that is designed to bring the nation together and to give Indigenous people a say on their own affairs as racially divisive, especially when the Coalition has had Indigenous advisory bodies and the Coalition promises that it will legislate an Indigenous advisory body. It shows that they don't really believe it's racially divisive.
Yeah, but you contradict yourself in the one answer, but you're running through all the arguments that have been rejected. You know, how can the opposition be against this this voice when it already has had in its own past lots of Aboriginal voices or advisors? And boy, there have been more than 30 big land councils, 3,000 corporations, a council of peace representing no fewer than 70. I mean, they have it. And when people look at that, Chris, when people look at that, they say this, wait a minute, if you're already getting all these advisory bodies, and then you say you need a voice. What does a voice have that those bodies that you do consult already don't? And the answer is obvious.
There are lots of arguments, Andrew, against the voice.
It is a de facto parliament in waiting for an Aboriginal sovereignty movement.
In fact, I know my good friend Anthony Dillon here
I don't interrupt you when you're making points. I'd be very glad if you didn't interrupt me, right? Okay? You've had your say. Just sit back for once and listen to the arguments that have actually won this referendum.